Now I would like to introduce our first speaker. He is a Jesuit priest, Father Patrick Kelly. He's a Jesuit priest, as I said, from the United States, and is currently scholar in residence at the University of Detroit Mercy in the United States. He was a standout athlete in high school and captain in an all-conference free safety on his college football team, American football, and one of the leading punt returners in the nation on second division. In addition to having a master's degree in theology from Harvard Divinity School and a licentiate in sacred theology from Western Jesuit School of Theology. Father Kelly, he studied with the prominent social scientist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and he has written several books related also always on sport issues from a theological and philosophical point of view. His first book was Catholic Perspectives on Sport from Medieval to Modern Times. And in addition to numerous academic articles and book chapters about sport, theology, and spirituality, he has edited the book Youth, Sport, and Spirituality, Catholic Perspectives from the University of Notre Dame Press in 2015. Other than that, this past semester, he has been teaching a course of Ignatian spirituality, theology, and sport at the Gregorian University in Rome until the pandemic arrived. And other than that, I'm happy and proud to say that he's a very good friend. He's frequent consultant of the Dicastery for the Laity, Family and Life on sport issues. And he's with us today to introduce our topic of this day entitled The Role of Sport for Life. So Father Kelly, whenever you want, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Santiago, and it's great to be with you again, as always. And also, it's wonderful to see familiar faces and friends. So I'm going to share my screen because I'm going to use a PowerPoint presentation here. And Santiago, if this isn't going well, please let me know in some way if you can't hear me or see the...
I'll do.
Okay. So Santiago has asked me to address coming out of the document that was written, came out of the Dicastery, Giving the Best of Yourself, sort of basic questions. Why is the church, engaged in and paying attention to sport and this aspect of culture? So I'll be doing that and maybe providing a little bit of a context even for what's in that document itself. I just have a short amount of time. As Santiago said, I played sports throughout my life. They were kind of the joy of my life when I was growing up. I made a lot of friends in that context. When I got into college, when I was kind of finishing up playing football in college, I became more explicitly interested in my faith life, Catholic faith life. And in my 20s, I started to think that maybe I, like St. Paul, should put behind me the childish things of my youth and be about the spiritual life. But I discovered for myself that didn't work. And I think that's because I was so profoundly shaped by my participation in sport, for good and maybe for ill in some ways, and that human formation was influencing my attempts to live the Christian life in my 20s. When I came to do doctoral studies, I had a question, and that was, what would a Catholic approach to sport as an aspect of culture be? And at that time, maybe surprisingly, there hadn't been much written about that. And I wasn't persuaded by what I was reading in terms of the history of sport. there was a tendency for historians of sport to characterize Christian attitudes to the body, especially prior to the Reformation, as thoroughly negative, loathing the flesh, and to therefore say that this wasn't a context within which sport or could have developed, or play or sport could have developed. But this actually couldn't account for what we know about the medieval period, especially the high and later medieval periods and early modern periods in Europe, because we know, especially due to social history, that lay Catholics were playing games and sports on the feast days and the holy days, which took up about a third of the year or more throughout these periods. These activities were also depicted in religious art of the time. So here's a stained glass window from the 14th century. Here's a carving of a ball game from the 14th century in Gloucester Cathedral as well in England. It's depicted in prayer books. Here's a prayer book from 1300 in France with depiction of people playing games, and on the right there's a woman acrobat and a musician. Sport, time for sport and play was also included in the humanist schools of the Renaissance and in the early Jesuit schools. The Jesuits, by the latter part of the 18th century, had 800 schools throughout Europe and other parts of the world, and all of them provided time and space for play and sport. So I ended up having a different question than had been asked up to that point, and that was, how is it that a religious culture emerged in these periods that seemed to so easily incorporate games and sport? And I think, generally speaking, historians of sport probably were not aware of Christian theology and its history, in that early and medieval theologians spent much of their time criticizing Gnostics and Manichaeans, precisely because these groups regarded the material world and the body in themselves as associated with evil. So to do so, the Christian theologians appealed to fundamental Christian beliefs about the creation of the material world. And God saw that it was good, is the refrain. The incarnation, so the word becoming flesh, and the resurrection of the person, body and soul. Irenaeus here in his writings against the Gnostics says, Christians hope for the salvation of the whole person, that is, of soul and body. When Montaigne wrote in an essay on education, we are not bringing up a soul, we're not bringing up a body, we're bringing up a person. We must not split him into two. He's writing out of this longer tradition. This is also the reason he gives for including time and space for sport and play in the school day of the humanists. So another part of the way that such a religious culture emerged has to do with the understanding of the relationship between faith and cultures. And here, St. Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles, is crucial. Of course, he took the good news to non-Jewish peoples, and in particular to Greeks. The people of Corinth had sponsored the Isthmian Games every other year since 582 BC. And so in introducing them to Jesus, he uses sport as a reference point for dialogue, famously writing, "Do you not know that in a race the runners all compete, but only one receives the prize?" And then goes on to explain what the Christian life is about. So here we have a biblical precedent of openness to non-Jewish cultures and acceptance of and dialogue with their games and sports. That would influence Christianity in subsequent centuries. One consequence of opening to the Greeks is that Greek philosophy began to influence Christian ethical thinking. And they developed what I'd like to call a play ethic. And Thomas Aquinas is very important here. We're saying that one of the consequences of the opening to the Greeks was that Greek thought began to influence Christian thinking. And in terms of ethics, Thomas Aquinas follows the ancients and Aristotle in associating virtue with moderation. So when he asks the question, can there be a virtue about games? He answers yes, because a human being should not be spending all of his or her time working. This would be excessive. So he quotes Augustine in the front part here: spare yourself at times, for it becomes a wise person sometimes to relax the high pressure of his attention to work. And how does that happen? It happens through playful activities. And so there can be a virtue about games. For Thomas, I think it's important to say that play is not only the pause that refreshes so that we can get back to work, that's really important. Rather, he says what we do in play, we do for its own sake. And he even viewed play as similar to contemplation because they're both enjoyable and we do them for their own sake. In response to the objection that virtuous acts should be directed to an end, which is Aristotle's view, Thomas says that the enjoyment that we experience in play is directed to the recreation and rest of the soul. For Thomas, then, play has its end in the human person being fully alive. It serves the human person. So Thomas's play ethic had a significant influence on preachers at this time and later. And the humanist and early Jesuit educators explicitly used this thinking to make the case that the students should have time for play and sport in the school day. It would be excessive to have them studying all the time. So these are some of the elements that are the basis for the approach, I would say, in much of Catholic thought, theology, and of the popes, and even in the document, giving the best of yourself. And here, the elements are that it takes play and sport seriously in themselves, as an aspect of human experience and culture. And because the person is a unity of body, soul, spirit, mind, we would say, working in educational institutions, embodied activities like play and sport also impact us at the level of our thinking. So we can arrive at new insights into ourselves and the meaning of our lives in the context of playing. It affects us at the level of our mind, but also at the level of spirit. St. Paul calls small letter S spirit, human spirit, that makes us capable of relationship with Holy Spirit. So it also, because we're a unity, it affects us at that dimension as well. So it can serve, play and sport can serve the human person then in his or her integral development. Reflecting on the massive appeal of the World Cup in 1978, Cardinal Ratzinger at the time, subsequently Pope Benedict, says, "It seems to me that the fascination of football consists of the fact that it unites both aspects, play and the freedom associated with that, and a training for life in a very persuasive manner." He says, for example, in team play, the player learns to put his individuality in the service of the whole. Sport unites people in a common goal. The success and failure of each one lies in the success or failure of everyone. And then Pope Francis reminds us that sport also has a role to play in terms of what he calls the culture of encounter, and leading to the unity of the human family. So he said to the European Olympic Committee, sport must always go hand in hand with solidarity, because sporting activity is called upon to radiate the most sublime values throughout society, especially the promotion of the unity of peoples, races, religions, and cultures, thus helping to overcome many divisions that our world still experiences today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Father Kelly. I think that it's very important to make an introduction such as this one, because it's important to remember, to remind why the Church cares about sport. And as you said, I think it's interesting what Saint Augustine said, that play is not opposed in our daily duties or in our life duties, but it's an objective, a goal in itself.